The YouTube algorithm has allowed millions of people to stumble upon a man with a smiling face, sitting at a piano, enjoying his time with his friends, as someone handed him a piece of sheet music he had never heard before. While many would think that he would just occasionally get it right, or maybe even comically bad, millions of people were surprised as he began playing the vast majority of the song almost exactly right. Once you get over how impressed you might be, most people's initial reaction would be what they are seeing was just faked for YouTube. However, if you look into the legitimacy of what he was doing, you can find dozens of people giving testimonies on how it was true. Whether that was his friends or strangers giving him random pieces of sheet music that Tom had not heard before to test his ability. While many millions were brought together to witness Tom's amazing skill to sight-read music, many thousands were also led to his ability to play ragtime. Ragtime was where his real skills were present. If you thought the way he could sight-read music was impressive, you should hear his ragtime. Not only was that an insane display of skill, but that was also a piece of music Tom wrote himself. Oftentimes Tom Brier had this immaculate ability to sight-read music, while many also loved listening to his ragtime piano playing. The second question most people would ask after they figured out this wasn't just some fake sight reading someone was putting on for a video, was now how is this man able to play the piano with such an impressive display of mastering his craft? If you asked Tom himself, he would respond with just practice. But to get a better answer, let's take a couple steps back and see where Tom Brier's life started, brilliantly told by the people at the West Coast Ragtime Society. Tom Brier was born in October 1971 in Oakdale, California, a farming community in the Great Central Valley south of Sacramento. When he was 4, his parents bought an old Schubert mechanical player piano, and soon he was picking out tunes he heard on the piano rolls. Aware that their son had talent, his parents enrolled him with a local piano teacher when he was 5, and in a short time, he was composing and notating his own music. He composed over 24 rags by the age of 11. In 1985, he came to the attention of Larry Applegate, the then president of the Sacramento Ragtime Society. Tom was invited to play at a meeting and immediately blew everyone away with his aggressive and articulate renderings of the ragtime classics. But what amazed everyone was his depth of understanding of early ragtime styles. His own compositions already embodied many of the subtleties of ragtime, yet were remarkably original, and all this when he was only 14 years old. Unbelievably, he has only gotten better since then. His mastery of the ragtime idiom has matured over a few short years. Now his signature rapid-fire left-hand runs have been tempered by a new attention to the inner harmonies and voicings of ragtime. This sensitivity is seen in his own compositions, which number well over 150. Tom Brier has released 8 albums: Rising Star in 1994, Generic in 1997, Pianola in 2000, Dueling at the McCoys in 2002, which was a piano duet with Nan Bostic, Skeletons in 2003, Rewind in 2006, Blue Sahara in 2009, and Constellations in 2012. He began appearing as a featured performer at the West Coast Ragtime Festival and other ragtime festivals right out of high school. Tom works as a programmer/analyst. When not tapping the computer keyboard at work, he's at home pounding on the piano keyboard, working up a new rag, transcribing handwritten scrolls or piano rolls, or busily engaged in a variety of music recording projects. If you asked one of Tom's friends, they would also talk about how often he was at work he would write songs in his head to play later. He would have to take a break from work just to write many of the ideas he had in his head down. Even when he was at work, with every single bit of free second he could find, he would further his passion for playing ragtime. I think almost everyone at some point has heard the music from various video games, but the reason Tom had not was because he dedicated nearly every second of his life to get better at the piano, oftentimes enjoying that passion with his friends other than his day job as a programmer and his newfound internet fame brought by Keeper First uploads. Keeper First was the friend who would occasionally record Tom's sight reading of a piece of music and upload it to YouTube. While just recording something to show their friends or curious strangers, those videos are the ones that blew up and allowed many to find out about his music. At the time of the making of this video, Tom Brier's piano playing on YouTube, the viral hits primarily coming from his ability to sight read, amassed more than 40 million views. However, this booming success one day led to a crashing stop. Saturday, August 6th, 2016, Tom was rear-ended by a Chevy Silverado while stopped on a freeway off-ramp in a line of traffic. The Silverado veered off the freeway at highway speed as the driver was looking down to find something he had dropped. This crushed the car Tom was driving from behind and pushed it into the car in front of him. Tom had to be removed through his car's passenger side window. Due to him smashing his head in front of him as he was hit, Tom had significant swelling in his brain, so he was put into a medically induced coma. The doctors, his family, and his friends were not sure if Tom would even live through the event, but with what little energy he had left, he fought to live. 6 days later, as Tom continued with his recovery and his brain swelling began to die down, he was let off the paralysis medication, and while the family noticed he was struggling to move, his right side was making improvements. For the first 3 months of Tom's recovery, it was primarily filled with hope and goodwill by everyone. Oftentimes people either know someone personally who has gone through something similar to Tom, where they had gone through intense physical damage and had managed to go from paraplegic to fully recovered, and that's what everyone was hoping for, especially compared to the alternative, where that person becomes disabled for the remainder of their often short life. However, here is where things become interesting. From this point on, there are going to be what will be described as two warring tribes. There are Tom's friends and fellow musicians against Tom's family. Tom is caught in the middle of all of this. If you read the posts made by the family about their visits with Tom, they will tell you very little and leave you with more questions than what they had answered. The vast majority of the family's journey with Tom's recovery is one that is far less public than what you will see from Tom's friends. The person who would keep the public updated about Tom's recovery via the family's perspective was Jeff Brier, who was, judging by the wording used, Tom's brother. He would go into detail about the family's frequent visits with Tom, describing what they did and how Tom had been feeling, what they disclosed the doctors saying about his recovery, and most controversially, their own testing of his abilities. I should say that after Tom had left an intensive care unit of a hospital, and even though at the time of the accident he was 46, he was moved into a nursing home, not a rehabilitation center, but a nursing home primarily assisting the elderly and specializes in Alzheimer's. The family would often talk about testing his grip strength, oftentimes specifically also testing how far he could raise his thumb on his right hand until they could tell Tom was in pain. They would often speak to him and about him as though he was severely mentally handicapped. Oftentimes how you would hear someone speaking to someone with Down syndrome or a similar condition. Many of the posts would also just look like this. This all lasted for about a year, noticing improvements from the family and friends alike, even him showing his first steps and beginning to say a few words. However, this is when it goes away from the perspective of the family onto the perspective of Tom's friends. Quickly going back about a year to when the accident happened, the majority of Tom's friends were not fond of how Tom was dealt with by his family. Oftentimes with how they would test and treat him, they would act as though he had lost mental ability equal to the physical ability he had lost. When the friends would attempt to provide things for Tom to use, the family would confiscate them for unknown reasons. Many of Tom's friends have said that Tom was never close to his family before the accident, and their involvement was simply out of obligation to them taking ownership of the situation due to being his immediate family and having to speak for Tom's well-being. When his family would report on their tests treating Tom as severely mentally disabled, Tom's friends would also test him with a simple yes or no response Tom could give by doing something like a thumbs up or down with his good left hand. Tom had a massive collection of sheet music, so his friends would bring by sheet music that they had and would ask Tom if he had it or not. He would answer correctly 100% of the time. They would ask him many things involving his piano, including who had played what, how to do something, and he would answer it with the same memory he would before the accident. His struggles, from the friends' perspectives, were purely physical. In Tom's mind, he understood nearly everything he did before the accident. It was just that his physical state was struggling, and his ability to physically communicate those things to other people became a complicated system due to his struggling ability to speak. Also, as the friends would test Tom, they would notice if he was not in the mood to be constantly tested, as anyone would become tired of. He would begin messing with the people testing him. Such as the time where his friends asked him to write sheet music from a program on a laptop, and Tom began mashing the keys and pushing against the mouse randomly, occasionally switching to random instruments and putting notes randomly around the screen, while doing the closest thing he could to his classic large belly laugh. While early on, even some of Tom's close friends were unable to tell if he was messing with the tests and laughing because some people with mental damage laugh in situations where they shouldn't. However, it's not an unreasonable assumption to make that he was sick of all the tests people would put him through and instead decided to mess with them. Even though much of Tom's physical state left the day he was hit, his humor and spirit lived on. However, Tom's friends were not there to test him. Many of them were close to him before the accident and had no intention just to begin ignoring him now after. Many people would go there to simply enjoy their time with Tom. Tom's friends were less concerned with his physical recovery and much more concerned with enjoying their time and making sure Tom was enjoying himself. They would go, and when they were able, would bring him snacks, play the piano for him, and even when he got enough motor function, brought him a small MIDI piano for Tom to attempt to start playing himself. While things began continuing as normal for a while, many of Tom's friends noticed that he began having trouble to speak again, to a point where he was no longer even able to say a word or two anymore. When Tom's friends had asked him if he was still receiving the speech therapy that had been working for him, Tom indicated to them that he no longer was. Tensions were already high before this, but when his friends learned that Tom was no longer receiving the therapy that was once showing signs of improving his physical health, many allegations were made. People understood that there would sadly, potentially be financial incentives for the family to do this. The family was receiving money from the government, the person who hit Tom, and/or insurance, and that large amount of money would no longer be lining the family's pockets if Tom would get better. As Tom's friends began questioning the family about why he was no longer receiving the treatment, they responded occasionally by saying that he was on a waiting list for additional treatment. However, that didn't make sense as people were asking why he was no longer receiving treatment. Past that point, the family began telling people that they were being bullied and began not addressing anyone's concerns any further, telling people that it is a privilege that they were being updated on Tom's status at all. However, what would you consider entitled? Would you consider the family entitled to potentially finding monetary gain through a family member's disability? Would you think they might be entitled to the help people are giving them with Tom's recovery, offering a temporary home to Tom's things so they don't have to pay for a storage unit? Do you think that the family is entitled to the help and kind words from others, even after doing so many things to turn people who care for Tom away, and yet people still care because they don't let a greedy family be a roadblock towards making sure someone they love recovers? This led many people to be incredibly upset at the situation. However, many people were left helpless, until there became rumors that an unknown person or group of people were taking legal action. Often as legal proceedings are in their pubescent stages, everything is incredibly quiet and little is known about it. There could be even no legal proceedings happening or have happened. However, as many of these pressures on Tom not receiving any help continued on for a year and a half, there eventually became a light in the end of the tunnel. Tom was being moved into a proper neurological rehabilitation center. While many people began worrying about Tom not receiving therapy and regressing with his recovery in late 2018, it was not until July 2020 where something was actually able to happen. Unsure if it is purely from outward pressure or rumored legal proceedings happening against the family, Tom was finally taken out of a nursing home that specializes in Alzheimer's, aimed at the elderly, and into an assisted living home that specializes in better helping Tom's recovery. However, this was partway through the current global pandemic, so people are not able to track Tom's progress in person. There is, for the first time though, active correspondence with people, whether that be phone calls with the center themselves, or being able to send Tom gifts without the family intercepting any of it. I believe with all of the pain that Tom has gone through, now he is finally able to properly begin his journey in recovery. With all of the pain he has gone through in the last 4 years, many people, I'm sure including Tom, finally have hope in seeing him live his life once again.